Why did the US Army build a military base 30 feet below the surface of the Greenland Ice Sheet in 1959? And why 3 years later did the whole facility collapse, crushed by its own walls beneath the surface of the ice? I visited Greenland last summer, and I thought it was going to be boring, a giant frozen ice cube the size of Texas, but it turned out it was a dynamic place, ever-changing, and that's one of the reasons that Camp Century failed, and one of the reasons that scientists are developing new ways to build within the ice on Greenland. During the Cold War, Greenland occupied a strategic position between the United States and the Soviet Union. Military planners envisioned the ice housing troops, equipment, even fighter jets kept in secret bases below the surface. Construction began on Camp Century in 1959. Temperatures there dropped as low as -70 degrees Fahrenheit. The massive project embodied the technocratic can-do spirit of the 1960s. The facility was comprised of dozens of tunnels dug out of the snow. Steel arches formed Camp Century's ceilings. After snow was dumped back on top, it would solidify, forming a very strong roof. Within the tunnels sat heated buildings, including barracks, workshops, labs, a barbershop, a drilling rig, and a cinema. At its peak, Camp Century housed 225 soldiers. The Army hoped the base would last for 10 years. And powering the facility was a nuclear reactor offering almost unlimited electricity. Reporters marveled over the project, but what they didn't know was that the base was linked to a secret Pentagon scheme called Project Iceworld. The plan was to install 600 nuclear-tipped missiles inside the Greenland Ice Sheet, connected by 2,500 miles of railway, all beneath the snow. But the Army never got close to realizing its dream. In 1966, as the ice was devouring each room millimeter by millimeter, the Army had to close the facility. Here was the mess hall before and after the ice started to devour the base. Officials underestimated how quickly the snow would move. Greenland seems permanent, but at its core, its essence is ephemerality. Take the transition from snow to ice. The Army engineers who built Camp Century used a machine called a snow miller to chop snow into tiny pieces before putting it back on the forms. Why does that technique create such strong ice? It works because ice itself is known as a hot solid. The edge of any bit of ice is liquid because of tiny vibrations in its molecules. Even at bitterly cold temperatures, that little bit of moisture helps grains of ice fuse together, a process called sintering. Sintering turns fairly light, loose snow into rock-hard building material. This happens naturally, over months, then years, then centuries. The weight of the snow exerts enormous pressure on the ice below as it sinters. That eventually creates glacial ice, many times more dense than the original snowfall. That allows ice sheets to store a lot of snow, and means the surface of the ice sheet is always sinking. Not surprisingly, building on the surface of an ice sheet is a pain in the ass, requiring deep foundations that must be constantly lifted as the surface continuously settles. The main challenge that Camp Century faced was that ice flows. Another substance that flows in its solid state is chocolate, demonstrated in this time-lapse by MIT students. This is a room from a Greenland scientific base, built recently. Its wooden beams are under enormous strain as the ceiling caves in. So, last summer scientists devised a new method of construction on Greenland, one that dispenses completely with the ceiling beams. Their trick? Balloons. They use the balloons to form tunnels, a ramp, even an elevator shaft. Once they're in place, the snow mill blows the snow back into place. 3 days later, it's hard enough to land a massive cargo plane on top. The balloons, meanwhile, can be deflated, leaving a cylindrical tunnel, and the balloons can be reused later. Now, the cave ceilings will inevitably sag, and they've already seen this happening. When that happens, you can just cut away the encroaching walls with a saw. Just as rising temperatures are hastening the demise of Iceworld, scientists are coming to terms with the essential fickle nature of the ice. I had an exciting feeling when I landed by helicopter in Greenland. I realized that I was coming to a place no one had ever been before, that this little icescape, this little corner of Iceworld had been larger, taller, different just a week before. It was thrilling for a second. I knew I was in a place that no one else could ever see. But then I realized I could never return, because even if I was to come to the same place using GPS coordinates, it would be a different place. It would have melted, changed, shifted, moved. At its core, I realized, Iceworld is ephemeral, always shifting. Thanks for watching Revealist.
All right!
If you like this video, please feel free to click on subscribe and watch more.